The Evil Within is a game that doesn't know what it wants to be. Is it a horror game? Is it an action game? Is it a game full of deep symbolism? Is it a story-based experience? These questions are at the core of the Evil Within's problem, identity. There's 3 good games embedded in this game. There's a good horror game, a good action game in here, but the mix and match nature of the game is its fatal flaw in my opinion. But if you can look past that, there are segments of action and excitement that will keep the suspense up and will make the game rather enjoyable. But for those who like a consistent experience, you will feel lost. And in my opinion, the game stays around way too long, as the last few acts will really wear on you. Like always, the following parameters were used for this review. Keep these in mind when making an opinion on whether or not to buy or not buy this game. I acquired the game a little bit after its release, and I haven't really talked a lot to people about the game's mechanics, but 1 or 2 people here and there. I do like the genre a bit, as I do have a favorite game of Resident Evil 4 in mind. I have played the game 18 hours, and I did beat the game in its entirety. So let's start off with the story of this game. Detective Castellanos, his partner Joseph Oda, and the new rookie cop Kidman get a call to the Beacon Hospital after disturbance goes down on its grounds. They get to the scene and, well, all hell breaks loose. Literally. You'll learn there's an evil entity named Ruvik, and a backplot regarding medical research, brain synchronization, and a lot of craziness. There's a good story embedded here, and what's done well is the handling of the story in terms of imagery. You will start to question what about the experience that the characters are going through is real and what is not, and what truly is the horrors that you are facing. The Evil Within does get you to ask questions, makes you wonder what everything means, and the Evil Within shines in that retrospect. Imagery is a huge part of the game, and frankly, I had a death or 2 just looking at the enemies in question. The embedded barbed wire, glass shards, and the way the enemies move all have a wonderful mysterious evil around them. You'll wonder what the horrors represent and what they say about the characters around you and the world around you. The plot and story does a very good job in building up the situation and making you feel for the characters in question and the backstory they may have. Characters will go through experiences that make them feel human and have flaws that aren't necessarily obvious, but good nonetheless. But the plot has a major flaw, the finishing blow. Where the climax of the story would be, I only found a weak uppercut to exist, where it should have been a knockout blow. This may be my perspective of the story, and this is the kind of story where interpretation is a huge part of the experience, but compared to the build-up, I found that it lacked an execution and a finish, which is a huge part of modern-day stories. I'll allude to this particular point later in my enhancers. The creepy atmosphere and music does well in playing to the imagery of the game, and there are definitely creepy moments in the game. However, the game's shifting of tones can take you places where the creepiness is offset and doesn't have the same tones as the rest of the story. You'll visit places such as the ruins of a downtown city to what seems to be a next-door village at Resident Evil 4. Yeah, I made that comparison for a specific reason, to the halls of a deep corridor of the hospital itself. You see, here's where the weird part of the Evil Within comes. Is the game scary? In my opinion, it isn't. Now, I have different expectations of horror, although I do recognize that horror can come in many forms, jump scares or being a little bit more subtle, and yet I don't think the Evil Within hits on any horror points. There was no lasting impact of the game's attempts to get my heart racing. It only stated the moment in question and nothing more. However, a different question should be asked. Is the game suspenseful? Yes it is. That's the thing. The Evil Within's strongest element is suspense. The comparisons to Resident Evil 4 are reasonable. This game in a lot of spots feels like a redone remixed version of Resident Evil 4, even coming with that wonderful chainsaw enemy. However, that can also be a bad thing, as I will allude to later on. The gameplay in question again is the over-the-shoulder shooter where ammo is semi-rare, and at times you'll feel the burn, especially in later levels, with the ammo that the game gives you. You'll never feel comfortable with your ammo count in later levels, and to the game's credit, that makes suspense. Almost every bullet counts, and you'll get in a panic when you've missed a shot or 3. Enemies are semi-intelligent at times. They will duck and move around in ways that you aren't expecting, which for people going for headshots will make them wonder if they should have tried it. Skill is rewarded here, but sometimes you feel like you'd rather have dumb luck on your side. With single enemies or 2, you can melee them to death using their AI patterns, and there is a stealth mechanic to the game where an enemy can be killed with 1 knife blow to the head if you sneak up on them correctly, and that's presented early on in the game. Too bad it isn't used very well in the later portions of the game. Sometimes you'll have an AI partner as well, and you'll have to watch them in certain portions of the game. The AI is surprisingly competent from what I saw, to the point where I was using him to take out enemies when working off of his attacks. I honestly was surprised by this. An earlier incident in the game made me think the AI was mediocre. I will say that they're a lot more effective with a melee weapon in hand than a gun, as they seem more aggressive and generally more useful. These sessions are few and far between, however, although it is a good change of pace pace in the game. Controls are what you would expect out of the current Resident Evil franchise type games. They seem alright. Aiming has a sway that can be improved with certain skill points, but the controls are reasonable for a game like this, at least for the PlayStation 4, which is where I played this game on. I did not play this on the PC, so I can't comment on how well the PC controls are. Fire is a big part of the game, as enemies that don't have their heads blown off can get right back up and start attacking you again, even if you got them down. Think of the Resident Evil remake for the GameCube, and the Crimson Heads that were in that game. Now, what's nice about this is that a match can take out multiple enemies if used correctly, and will even take out enemies that aren't downed. A smartly used match can take it down 3, 4, or even more enemies. You'll learn to love matches, and the amount to upgrade the matches is cheap, so you'll want to upgrade them right away. Headshots also work pretty well here, if you can hit them. Patience is a key, and even a nice shot to the head may not take down an enemy as they lumber toward you with part of their skull missing. So, okay, is the combat good? For the most part, yes. Again, it reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 4, and choosing your spots to stay still and aim and being mobile is a key part of combat. It can be fun, especially in sequences with a bunch of people, and having to manage your resources wisely. There were moments, especially early on, when I was having a blast, using the right weapon in the right situation to get out of it, feeling like a badass coming out of that fight. There's also a nice upgrade system. Brain Gel is scattered among the world and can drop off your enemies, and it's used to upgrade your abilities, guns, and ammo count. These upgrades hit all spans of your gameplay: your sprint speed, your health, how much you can recover on a health item usage, the amount of damage your guns do, critical chance, and how much ammo you can hold. But therein lies a problem. Several upgrades are far more useful than the rest of them. Like I said, ammo is relatively scarce. Rarely did I run into a situation where I was leaving ammo behind, especially after the first third of the game. Meanwhile, your sprint speed is pathetic at the start of the game, and having a high stamina is incredibly useful in controlling enemies and your position on the battlefield. But I alluded to the chaotic gameplay here, and that's a major problem with The Evil Within. You got a lot of different elements in terms of levels, and I'll give the game this: it never feels the same in any one area, although on the flip side that's somewhat of a problem. You'll have more traditional horror elements, such as walking around a hospital with invisible enemies all around you that you can barely see unless you look at the glass they're walking on, or if you look at the shadows that they're casting. But then, in the next level, you'll be thrown into a more traditional action section where several enemies are around and you'll have to fight your way out. Or you'll be thrown into a water section where a sea serpent will kill you in one hit if you're not careful. And in looking at these sections by themselves, they all could be considered fun in a way, except that sea serpent one. Screw that sea serpent. But that's separate. And when they come together in terms of the game, they don't come together right. You see, I believe the creators were always wanting the players to feel on edge. And to an extent, that does work. But there's a big difference in being on edge and being prepared and being on edge. Feeling on edge and feeling like you're prepared for it is different from being on edge and yelling, "Oh, come on," at it. You see, when the horror and suspense is consistent, that's when it's most effective. And I don't mean predictable. I mean that the rules for your world are set, and those rules aren't altered dramatically with every encounter. Slightly, yes, but dramatically, no. And that's where I think The Evil Within falls on flat tones for me. Let's take an example. You're introduced to the stealth system early on, and then are thrown into action sections that completely go against that. You're taught to try to avoid enemies if you can early on, and then follow it up with having to force an issue with an obviously powerful enemy a chapter after that. It's hard to tell what the game wants from you at times, and that can lead to frustration for the player. The rules keep on constantly changing for them. This is where the war of attrition comes in. For me, for example, I love the first few levels, then enjoy the next few, but by the last few I was cursing, wanting the game to end, and wasn't having a good time. And that's the thing, the last few levels had elements that were reasonable, such as a boss fight with an invisible monster, but honestly I couldn't enjoy them as I was worn off of the game constantly changing tone on me. Overall, I give The Evil Within a 72 out of 100. The game has several strong points to it, but the game itself is a game you can definitely wait on. It's a game that's going to rely on what the person is wanting to get out of it, and those looking at the original trailer, for example, are going to be really disappointed in what the game offers. To me, it is a game you can wait on. Worth a play when the opportunity is right, because it has good set pieces and good combat, but it needs a reasonable sale for it to be worth it for the average person. But like always, what about those enhancers that I always talk about? A -10 for needing a conclusion on a story. Okay, I alluded to this earlier, and I'm gonna come out and say it. If you're expecting some kind of closure from this story, you've got another thing coming. I actually wrote a story over at Tech Raptor about this. The ending of this game pissed me off in more ways than one. Now, there's a way of doing endings that are open to interpretation, but this game did a horrible job in its climactic moment. Honestly, it pissed me off in so many ways, and actually really pisses me off that the DLC may contain vital story content, mostly because the main story was interesting enough to get my attention. A -15 if you require traditional horror out of the game. Here's the thing, if you're expecting what the initial trailers of this game show, a creepy and dark atmosphere and a lot of horror elements, you're not going to get it. The game's horror elements aren't here. Now, if you have to have a horror horror game, then go look at something else. Go look at Amnesia, go look at Silent Hill, go look at something else. The thing is that the horror does not work in this game. However, as I'll allude to right now, there is one element that it does do well. Plus 12 if you love chaotic gameplay or you have an emphasis on suspense. I'll give the evil within this. It has suspense dripping from every pore. You'll always be on edge as you're thrown into situations that you aren't ready for, such as being chased by a multi-armed woman who is only weak to fire, to navigating an area that you can't use your guns or matches due to flammable gas in the area. It always keeps you guessing, it always keeps you on edge, and if you're looking for that kind of gameplay in terms of the games that you're playing, The Evil Within does its job rather nicely. Plus 5 if you love specific imagery. Again, like I said, there's a lot of imagery embedded within this game, and if you have appreciation for symbolism, you'll love some of the enemies and concepts this game throws at you. What does the fire mean? What does a barbed wire mean that is embedded in them? Why do certain characters have certain elements to them? It is a very image-ridden game, and you'll enjoy that if you love imagery. Overall, this is the kind of game that I think my review system is suited for. The thing is that on a technical level, there are some things that the game does right. However, there are some things that a lot of people will be put off by, and a lot of things that a player that loves suspense, for example, will love about this game. It's one of those games that's going to be really a love and hate relationship. People are going to either love it or they're going to hate it. There isn't actually going to be a real in-between from what I see. Use the information that you have gotten through this review to make a decision on whether to purchase the game. I myself, even though I bought it at full price, I did enjoy it, but I really wish I had picked it up at a cheaper price later on. Hey, thanks for watching. If you have a chance, leave some feedback and comments below. If you liked the video, hit that like button. And if you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. This is Dragonix signing off, hoping that gaming brings as much fun to you as it does for me.